Then, curious of a shadow thrown by truth, it strained towards some otherness of self. It was drawn to an unknown face peering through night.
Keep going a little.
It sensed a negative infinity, a void supernal whose immense excess, imitating God and everlasting time, offered ground for nature's adverse birth and matter's rigid, hard unconsciousness, harboring the brilliance of a transient soul that lights up birth and death and ignorant life.
Yeah, so there's quite a bit here, and we have to look a little bit uh, to this previous lines. He's speaking of this mortal now. We complain of death and fate, and we ourselves have called on these problems, this troubled world. We have chosen that for our home. The gods do not have psychic beings. They are immortal, and they don't have any complaints because they're not evolutionary.
Yeah.
So he says you are the author of your own pain. And once in the immortal boundlessness of self, in this vast truth of consciousness and light, what happened? The soul looked out from its felicity. It felt the spirit's interminable bliss. It knew itself deathless, timeless, spaceless one. It saw the eternal, lived in the infinite. And then we get this strange statement. Then curious of a shadow thrown by truth. It strained, it is the soul now. He's speaking about the soul. It strained towards some otherness of self. It was drawn to an unknown face peering through the night. So that that is God's opposite face. And it sensed a negative infinity, of course, and a void supernal, a void heaven, whose immense excess seems to imitate God and everlasting time. And it offered a ground for nature's adverse birth. So does nature have an adverse birth, and why does matter have a rigid, hard unconsciousness, harboring the brilliance of a transient soul that lights up birth and death and life? Very simply because they're the initial manifestations. Now, nature's adverse birth is what we can understand it in certain ways. Uh, Nature does not always do the best things because she experiments. And she experiments with death and birth and destruction and construction. And therefore, this area, this supernal heaven here, imitates God and everlasting time. And it offers this ground, this possibility for nature's adverse birth and matter's rigid, hard unconsciousness. We've talked about this many times, I think, that matter is unconscious. It is the most unconscious thing in the universe.
Yes.
And it's rigid also. It doesn't want to take progressive evolutionary birth because it's happy where it is. A lump of clay is a lump of clay. A bunch of stones are a bunch of stones, even though they have the divine presence within them. They don't want to move.
Yes.
This fine poet has said that if the stone moved, it would shock people. So why should I move? I'll just be myself. It's a beautiful, beautiful line. It's very short.
Yes.
A mind arose.
A mind arose that stared at nothingness, till figures formed of what could never be. It housed the contrary of all that is.
Oh, so this is very interesting because the mind, as Mother and Sri Aurobindo have often said, is in the lower range of body, life, and mind, the ignorance. The mind arose, just the first mind arising, doesn't see anything, it stares at nothingness. And finally, it sees these figures of what could never be. That's very interesting. And even housed the contrary of all that is. So he's going to go on and tell us more about this naught, this emptiness. Okay? You know what?
A knot appeared as being's huge sealed cause, its dumb support in a blank infinite, in whose abysm spirit must disappear. A darkened nature lived and held the seed of spirit hidden and feigning not to be.
So we have to remember that this is very early on in the evolution of the mind. So this nothingness, this naught, non-existence appears as the cause of being. And note that he capitalizes the word being. And he tells us that the pure being is the affirmation of the unknowable of itself as the free base of all cosmic existence. And that's in the life divine. And another time he tells us the absolute manifests itself in two terms, a being and a becoming. The being is the fundamental reality. The becoming is an effectual reality. So we see that this being now that he's talking about, it appears that it's nothing, non-existence. And then it's dumb support in a blank infinite. Takes us almost back to Book 1, Canto 1, the creation of the world before dawn. In whose abyss, the great deep, the primal chaos, spirit must disappear. And then he says, a darkened nature lived and held the seed of spirit, hidden and feigning not to be. To feign is to make believe, to pretend. So the spirit is hidden and is pretending not even to be. This is a strange thing that he's telling us here, because well, you have to go. I don't know why I'm getting this crazy line, but you have to go to the next line. Yeah. Okay.
Eternal consciousness became a freak of an unsouled Almighty inconscient, and breathed no more as spirit's native air. Bliss was an incident of a mortal hour, a stranger in the insentient universe.
Yeah. Um, this is continuing on with this feeling, of course, that this eternal consciousness, the divine consciousness, the supreme consciousness, became a freak of an unsouled, almighty inconscient. and we've read a lot about inconscient dreams. But it's very important because it didn't breathe any more the spirit's native air. And even bliss was an incident of a mortal hour. You know, it reminds me of us today. Bliss is very, very fleeting, isn't it? Very fleeting. And it seems always mixed with sorrow at the end.
Yeah.
So bliss here is an incident of a mortal hour, a stranger. It's even a stranger in the insentient universe. Insentient, of course, here is inanimate or without feeling or sensation. So now you could continue a little bit. Oh, yeah, we got time.
As one drawn by the grandeur of the void, the soul attracted leaned to the abyss. It longed for the adventure of ignorance and the marvel and surprise of the unknown and the endless possibility that lurked in the womb of chaos and in nothing's gulf, or looked from the unfathomed eyes of chance.
Oh, well, I think it's pretty clear
Yeah,
what's happening here.
yeah,
The spirit wants to experience all these negatives also.
yeah,
And I guess that's what we have done in many past lives as well, because one has to go through all of these things. And when it says that it's tired of its unchanging happiness, many people say that, heaven
yeah,
is for me. I don't want angels singing every day. So it turned away from immortality, and it was even drawn to this call of hazard and danger because it's the charm of danger. And it yearned to the pathos, uh, the sympathy, tenderness, sorrow of grief, the drama of pain.
yeah.
So I think you have to read more and more. It tired?
It tired of its unchanging happiness. It turned away from immortality. It was drawn to hazard's fall and danger's charm. It yearned to the pathos of grief and the drama of pain. Perdition's peril, the wounded bear escape, the music of ruin and its glamour and crash, the savor of pity and the gamble of love and passion and the ambiguous face of fate.
Yes. I think you said pathos.
Pathos, yeah,
I think it's
I'm
pathos, I believe.
pathos. Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
So we're seeing what this experience is of the soul. It wants this trauma of pain. It wants this pathos of grief. It wants the perdition, of course, is loss of the soul. It wants the wounded bear escape. Just the wounded bear escape. And it even wants the music of ruin and the, and its clamor and crash, the savor, the specific taste or smell of pity and the gamble of love and passion and the ambiguous face of fate. What an experience we've all had to go through. Now, could you read from the beginning because our time is
Yes, yes. Then, curious of a shadow thrown by truth, it strained towards some otherness of self. It was drawn to an unknown face peering through night. It sensed the negative infinity, a void supernal whose immense excess, imitating God and everlasting time, offered a ground for nature's adverse birth, and matter's rigid, hard unconsciousness, harboring the brilliance of a transient soul that lights up birth and death and ignorant life. A mind arose that stared at nothingness till figures formed of what could never be. It housed the contrary of all that is. A knot appeared as being's huge sealed halls, its dumb support in a blank infinite, in whose abysm spirit must disappear. A darkened nature lived and held the seed of spirit hidden and feigning not to be. Eternal consciousness became a freak of an unsouled Almighty inconscient, and breathed no more as spirit's native air. Bliss was an incident of a mortal hour, a stranger in the insentient universe. As one drawn by the grandeur of the void, the soul attracted leaned to the abyss. It longed for the adventure of ignorance, and the marvel and surprise of the unknown, and the endless possibility that lurked in the womb of chaos and in nothing's gulf, or looked from the unfathomed eyes of chance. It tired of its unchanging happiness. It turned away from immortality. It was drawn to hazard's fall and danger's charm. It yearned to the pathos of grief, the drama of pain, perdition's peril, the wounded bear escape, the music of ruin and its glamour and crash, the savor of pity and the gamble of love and passion, and the ambiguous face of fate.
Excellent reading.
Thank
You
you.
you made such progress when you finally realized you should not drop that last word. And
Yes.
it's made all the difference.
Yeah.
I mean, you carried me through that experience.
Thank you. I'll
Namaste.
see you next week. Thank you. Namaste, Naraji.
See you next week.